In the past few years, sedan sales have taken a serious nosedive, and it's all thanks to the wider availability of crossovers.
So are sedans still an option, or do you just have to get a crossover? We brought out two compact cars worth less than $30,000. One a crossover, one a sedan.
They may not look like they have a lot in common, but buyers are picking one body style over another, and we're here to investigate exactly why that is. This funky car is the Nissan Kicks. It's a subcompact crossover that sits below the Nissan Rogue Sport and costs just over $17,000 to begin with. Vehicles like this are eating away at compact car sales. It has a smaller wheelbase than most compact cars like Nissan's own Sentra or the Volkswagen Jetta that we brought out here today. That allows it to feel really agile with a smaller turning circle than most compact sedans. You may think it's an unfair demonstration, but many buyers downsize when they switch from a compact sedan to a crossover, mainly because the interior space in a crossover is on par with a slightly bigger sedan.
But let's return to the realm of sedans, which have been getting better and better to stay relevant in the face of increased competition from crossovers. The Jetta has a longer wheelbase and is wider too, and it boasts more interior space than before. But all of that means very little when a subcompact crossover has more cargo space, right? Well, actually, the design of the Jetta doesn't quite emphasize headroom as much as a crossover does, but it does have pretty good legroom in the back. And the longer wheelbase allows for a more stable and smoother on-road experience, perfect for those who spend a lot of time on highways.
Style-wise, these crossovers end up looking more like a hiked-up hatchback than a utility vehicle. And in reality, they have a very marginal increase in ground clearance over a regular hatchback. In fact, this car just has about half an inch more ground clearance than, say, a Nissan Sentra. In the past, SUVs used to be criticized for being a bit tippy and rollover prone. But since 2012, electronic stability control has become mandatory, so cars like this are safer than ever. Now, the IIHS actually gives this Kicks a top safety pick rating. And the only criticisms that the Insurance Institute has to say about this car is that the passenger safety during the small overlap test isn't the best, and these headlights cause a lot of glare when it comes to oncoming traffic. That might have to do with this higher ride height. But back to the functional body design of a crossover. You see, this has way more headroom and more cargo space than most sedans. In fact, there's over 25 cubic feet behind the rear seats, and you can fold those rear seats to almost double the amount of space back there.
But obviously, the sleeker design of the Jetta will help it be slipperier through the air, and that helps with fuel economy. And speaking personally here, I just think that sedans look better. But here's the thing about sedans. It's what your dad drove. And historically, that's not been a good place to be. Think of the wagon, think of the minivan. Nobody wants to be driving what their parents were driving, and that's kind of the space the sedan occupies right now. And that might also be why the crossover is so attractive to a younger market.
But step inside the Kicks and you may be greeted with a very different seating position. Unlike sedans, crossovers feature a far more upright driving position, where your feet are beneath you rather than stretched out in front of you. The upright position gives you a slightly better view of the road in some cases. Like almost all cars today, the Kicks has a lot of technology. This model has a touchscreen with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay support, but there is no navigation system. There's automatic climate control, heated seats, and handy safety features like forward collision warning, blind spot monitoring, a rear view camera, and a 360-degree view when parking. There's also a bright digital gauge cluster which doesn't look too bad. Not to mention the Bose sound system, which sounds really good. The materials aren't the sexiest, but this isn't an Infiniti or Mercedes. It's a cheap car and it punches above its weight class. You can tell that designers want crossovers to feel like an open room with some chairs in it, rather than a focused cockpit.
Jumping into the Jetta, you get to see the benefits of a car that's a class above. But compare the quality and it seems like you're getting more for your money in the Jetta than the Kicks. Like the Kicks, there's a lot of technology and a lot of it seems more impressive. There's a larger touchscreen with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, as well as a big virtual cockpit. The car features dual zone climate control, and overall the design seems more driver focused, like a cockpit rather than an open cabin feeling with a crossover. This is common among sedans, but some, like the Corolla and the Impreza, have been leaning towards the open concept cabin. This will come down to owner preference. But the biggest takeaway here is that the Jetta does feel more premium. And again, that's because of how it's a class above the Kicks, despite being barely a few inches larger than a crossover. The two types of car do drive very differently though. All right, Sammy, hang on because you look like you're gonna fall over the steering wheel.
So we're now driving the Kicks, and it's a pretty different driving experience than most sedans. Well, I will admit that this car, well, the powertrain isn't the most impressive. It features a 1.6 liter 4-cylinder engine that makes 125 horsepower, and that's mated to a CVT and a front-wheel drive drivetrain.
Which sounds terrible, but actually isn't.
So here's the deal, like so many crossovers actually feature only front-wheel drive, no all-wheel drive options. Although other ones are featuring all-wheel drive, more and more automakers like Toyota and Kia are featuring front-wheel drive only crossovers. And I think that's okay, because these vehicles feature a higher ground clearance, and that means that, you know, they're still gonna help you get through some snow, some seasonal weather.
Yeah.
But what's the benefit of all-wheel drive in a car that's this small and doesn't even have that much power to begin with, right? It just adds weight and reduces fuel economy.
Right, and I think that's one of the things that you really got to think about when you're getting an all-wheel drive car, is that, like, they tend to be really, like, it wastes a lot of energy trying to send power all over the place. And even in the best case scenarios with these things, it's a slip and grip system. So it's not like you're getting a Jeep all of a sudden because you have a crossover. Really, you're still getting a hatchback that occasionally will send some of the power to the back wheels.
But, I mean, this car is still pretty fuel efficient. That's because it doesn't feature so much heavy equipment, because it doesn't have an all-wheel drive system, it doesn't have a turbocharged engine, it weighs under 2,700 pounds, and as a result, it gets about 33 miles per gallon combined, which is not bad at all.
It's only one less than the Jetta that we have here, and that's a pretty good representation of a small sedan. So, you know, just because you have something called a crossover doesn't mean you're getting really terrible fuel economy.
Right. And I will admit, because this car is so light, it's actually kind of agile. It's zippy. It's fun.
It's really fun.
The throttle response is really good because there's nothing like a lot of weight transfer.
There's nothing in the way. There's no weight transfer. There's no turbo lag. There's just a little bit of... CVT has to figure out what it's doing.
Yeah, CVTs are going to CVT, right?
But for CVTs, I'd say this is a pretty good one. Anyway, we're not comparing the cars directly. We're just saying that just because you have a crossover, something based on an SUV, you haven't all of a sudden gotten an SUV. It's really, these are a lot more like hatchbacks that are a bit taller, a bit higher above the ground.
But overall, I mean, when you compare a crossover driving experience and a sedan driving experience, it's not that big of a jump. You know, you're not losing so much in comparison. But let's jump into the Jetta and double check.
So overall, in a Jetta, or in a sedan in general, you do feel lower to the ground, and that has to do with it not being raised up like a crossover. I mean, that's one of the big selling features for a lot of people, is the high driving position. But for people like us, who are kind of enthusiasts, I don't know about you, I kind of don't like being up high. I prefer the low seating position of a sedan.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, most of the sedans feel lower to the ground. I love the driving position of a sedan with your feet out in front of you,
for sure,
rather than your feet being underneath you.
Yeah, I don't particularly want to feel like I'm in a kitchen chair when I'm driving. Like, I like to feel like I'm low in the car. A lot of that makes it feel more active, more sporty, but that isn't necessarily down to the drivetrain. This is a pretty small engine. It's a 1.4 liter car. It's got a turbocharger and an 8-speed auto. And that's not what you'd call the sportiest of sporty drivetrains, but because it's low to the ground, because it has that low center of gravity, and because it's designed to feel a little sportier, when you're in the turns, when you're driving side to side, it's less tippy.
Right.
You do feel like you're more in control. And one of the other advantages of that is that you get better aerodynamics. This car in particular, the Jetta, I think it has a 0.23 or something like that coefficient of drag. Nice. It's very aerodynamic. And with active grille shutters and all sorts of tricks that they can use, this thing gets 34 miles per gallon combined. 40 miles per gallon on the highway, though, and you know that's to be expected from a German car, but a sedan in general is going to be a more aerodynamic shape. Actually,
we were talking about this earlier. The sedan, you know, the whole sedan feeling is also a little bit more quieter, a little bit smoother because of the longer wheelbase in this vehicle.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's better suited for like highway driving, right?
It certainly does. I mean, the Jetta isn't bad at that, but this is just better. A sedan is always going to be a little stabler at high speed. And because you don't have an open trunk, that also means that there's some sound deadening happening back there. So it's kind of quieter most of the time, too.
Yeah, you definitely notice not just less road noise, but because of the lower design, the sleeker design, you get less wind noise as well. And that's what's happening a lot in these crossovers.
This car does not come with the option for all-wheel drive, though.
Right.
Which is, for a lot of people, going to be a big disadvantage. I don't think it is. Front-wheel drive is really great in low-grip situations. But if you do really want it, then that's something to consider, that this doesn't come with that.
I mean, very few sedans come with all-wheel drive. I think only the Impreza in this class would come with all-wheel drive. And even in the mid-size sedans, you just got that new Altima and, I guess, the Legacy, and I think some of the very expensive versions of the Ford Fusion, which aren't going to be around very longer. Sedans are just not as versatile as crossovers. That's the whole point. That's why people are buying more crossovers, right?
And people like me can argue all day long that all-wheel drive isn't really necessary, that front-wheel drive is perfectly good. I mean, I've driven in snow and all sorts of front-wheel drive cars, and because the weight's over the front wheels, it's okay. But I have to admit that all-wheel drive is a little bit better, and people are going to want the option. And if you can't offer it to them, then people are going to go into the segment where it is offered.
On the other hand, crossovers are more practical, with more space for your passengers and cargo. Sure, you give up a little bit of driving fun, but these things just have fewer functional compromises. They have more space, they're just as fuel efficient, and they have more ground clearance.
They're priced the same. It's easy to see why people are going into crossovers. But in reality, crossovers tend to be cheaper, and that kind of makes them a no-brainer.